Hola, muy buenas noches. Bienvenidos a una nueva actividad del Centro de Estudios de Arquitectura Contemporánea como parte del programa de público de la Escuela de Arquitectura y Estudios Urbanos de la Universidad Torcuato Di Tella. El día de hoy daremos comienzo a un ciclo, que es el ciclo Editorial Clinic. Diría que es un ciclo nuevo, pero son preocupaciones, intereses e inquietudes que tienen ya un buen tiempo en la escuela. En ese sentido es Ana Font quien va a estar coordinando este ciclo en su primera iteración y en las siguientes, que es profesora de la escuela y coordinadora del Archivo de Arquitectura. Hola Ana. ¿Cómo estás? Bueno, voy a hacer una pequeña presentación del ciclo y luego les voy a dejar con Ana, que va a presentar la actividad del día de hoy. Editorial Clinic organizes roundtables in order to explore the relationship between editorial lines of specialized media and their capacity to disseminate and problematize contemporary architectural culture, and aimed at recognizing and constructing editorial criteria as capacities to articulate, influence, and promote interesting disciplinary debate. A diagnosis is presented of the forces that they mobilize and the ways in which domains and territory of culture are disputed. And through the presentation of editorial statements and the associated articles, editors and essayists of architecture publications discuss with the coordinator of Archivo de Arquitectura, Ana Font. So I leave it to you, Ana.
Bueno, gracias, Manuel. Thank you. I will continue in English, but we will be shifting languages from Spanish to English a bit seamlessly, as we have different origins. Actually, we're pretty much all over the place with localizations in this event, which I think I want to thank everybody that's here today for adjusting their schedules to this kind of universal space where we are meeting. And I'm really happy that we're starting this year with this event. I want to take one moment to explain the context a bit more explicitly, even that is the first time, and regarding the archive at the school, which is an archive it's a young one, but I mean, all archives have been young at some point. And this one that I've been coordinating for the last almost 10 years, has two sides. One it's focused more on registering, and the other one it's more on edition. And it's on this second kind of side of the archive that we are focusing this discussion today. In terms of what we are producing, we have an editorial line running up with Archivos de Arquitectura, which is also accompanied by a culture of different zines that we have been producing. And we are very much interested in thinking this idea of archive as project, as editorial project. And even if for us it has been always fundamentally digital, the work that we've done, the turn to this non-presentiality in the last year has helped us shape also this exteriority beyond the small glimpses that we could articulate before. And this cycle, Editorial Clinic, as Manuel just said, we'll be reflecting about how to think such editorial lines as a cultural act by establishing conversations which work like the one we will have the pleasure to see today, which is in this case the shaping of Manifest as a journal for the Americas. This journal we will keep introducing at different scales because it's a complex project, very interesting one. It's in its third issue at this time. And this is the issue that we will be focusing in terms of particular content, but we will also be speaking about the general strategies that put it into place from the start and how it evolved. I want to introduce briefly how the event of today is going to be structured so that we have all the coordinates and we know where we are standing at every time. We have thought of this as two parts, which will merge at the end with a general discussion. These two parts seek to relate the editorial strategy with the article as unit of contribution. In the first part, we will focus on manifest issue 3, which is titled Bigger Than Big. And Mauricio Quiroz will moderate the intervention of 3 contributions, although it can be understood more like 2 + 1, and well, you'll see why I'm saying this. And in the second part, we will unfold from the platform of this first block, and I will have a conversation with Anne and Anthony on the editorial drives and motivations of the journal. The intention is that this conversation will progressively become a Q&A with the audience, and also embed all the participants, the 3 contributors and Mauricio himself. So I will be integrating the questions and different comments from the chat as we speak. And I will say this again later, but please note to everybody that is joining us in the different platforms, YouTube, in this webinar, Instagram, that this is open. We will receive questions in any medium that we are aware of all these kind of different inputs, and please ask them in Spanish, in English, in any language that we might be able to understand, and don't be shy on that regard. We will operate driven mostly by the will to communicate, and we are very eager to discuss and hear one another today. Lastly, regarding the crowd that is gathered here today and that will be presenting and generously have been joining this event, I want to introduce you to the 2 founding editors, Dan Handel and Anthony Shabati, and one of the advisory editors, as I was mentioning, Mauricio. The 3 of them, dear friends from previous bonding times, and from whom I'm very happy to be seeing after so many years. So this is also a personal pleasure to be hosting this event. Particularly, very briefly, in terms of CVs, we don't want to expand because these guys have done a lot and are onto many things. But Anthony works at the intersection of architecture and the history of science and technology. He's principal of Somatic Collaborative in New York, and the Daniel Rose Visiting Assistant Professor in Urban Studies at Yale University. Dan is an architect and curator working on research-based exhibitions and publications with a penchant for underexplored ideas, figures, and practices that shape contemporary built environments. And Mauricio is assistant professor at the John H. Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape and Design. He was researcher for the Office of the Director of the Canadian Centre for Architecture from 2010 until 2014, and has practiced and continues practicing architecture in America and Europe. So with this introduction, I give word to Mauricio, who will, I understand, introduce the journal briefly, as well as the contributors that accompany us today. So thank you, Mauricio. Te paso la palabra.
Gracias. Thank you very much, Anna, for the very kind introduction. It is really great to be part of the remote launch of Manifest 3 here at the Ditela, and many thanks to all of you joining us for the event. This is the 5th of many launches that Manifest will be doing. And with upcoming events in Mexico City, Cambridge, New York City, Halifax, and Lima, among others. Maybe we should begin by sketching out what Manifest is, which is to say an independent print journal dedicated to the art, architecture, and landscapes of the Americas. It was founded by Anthony Shabati, like Anna mentioned, Dan Handel, and Justin Fowler to initiate a critical and imaginative conversation about the Americas. The journal has been described by some as the first literary journal of architecture. And of course, we like this description because Manifest provides an opportunity to place in historical work in dialogue with contemporary subjects, projective tracts, and admitted fictions. Manifest is as much a venue for literary experimentation as it is a venue for analytical investigation. The journal has certainly been fortunate enough to receive support from the Graham Foundation and some anonymous donors and benefactors, and from a readership that truly extends across the globe, from Thailand to Peru and from Canada to Indonesia. While it maintains an active online presence, you can find much more on this on the website, Manifest really remains fiercely committed to print as a medium of exchange of ideas and experiences. Now, the first 2 issues of the journal really focused respectively on definitions of Americanness, or what we can call Americanness in the built environment, and on the complex theme of religion and space throughout the America. The current issue, and that is issue number 3, is titled Bigger Than Big, and it focuses on the physical dimensions of the American continent, its landscape, and its material imaginaries. And it is why this evening we're here to reconsider this bigger than big and to ask, in short, what does it mean to grapple with the immensity of the Americas? Issue number 3 provides some clues to these questions, and perhaps appropriately, it is the largest issue yet with over 50 contributors and 280 pages so far. In this context, the deliberate use of the term Americas actually acquires further significance. Of course, the stuff of the continent transcends political borders, which expands from the plains of the Patagonia to the Arctic circles. But the term also connotes the multiplicity that exists within the given territory and an easy layering of environments, people, and ideologies that cannot be summarized in an executive brief or presidential campaign, but that one that has to be excavated, reflected upon, and constantly and consistently reimagined. I will briefly introduce our speakers, describe their published pieces, and then ask them a couple of questions regarding the work. And when we have asked our initial questions, we will then be much more than happy, as Anna mentioned, to accept questions from the audience through whichever means you have available to you. And so to this end, let me introduce you to our panelists. The first one is Mariana Siracusa. She is an Argentinian scholar. She's based in Milan. Her current research focuses on the effects of energy infrastructure on remote non-urban landscape. She's also founder of Espacio, which is an independent platform for critical reflection, speculation, and discussions on architecture. Our second guest is Enrique Ramirez. He's a scholar and historian of modern and contemporary architectural history. He has been visiting assistant professor at Pratt Institute and is currently a critic at the Yale School of Art. Enrique brings his former experiences to bear on his research, which considers diverse topics such as aviation history and cinematographic representations of the landscape. Third is Ana Maria León. She's an architect and a historian of objects, buildings, and landscapes. And her research and teachings examines the modernities of the Americas and its transcontinental flows, with particular focus on how different publics relate to each other through spatial practices and discourses of powers and resistance. She is an active member of several collaborations, laboring to broaden the reach of architectural history, including the Feminist Art and Architecture Collective, or FAAC, the Global Architectural History Teaching Collaborative, GAHTC, Detroit Resists, and the Decolonizing Pedagogies Workshop, and Nuestro Norte es el Sur. So welcome to our 3 guests. This evening, we will begin by asking a question to Mariana, whose text Wonderland Patagonia portrays the plains of Patagonia as both a desolate and land of adventure and a deposit of ancient life forms, leading Charles Darwin to ponder the painful slowness of the geological time, or Francisco Moreno to establish the Buenos Aires Archaeological and Anthropological Museum. And Ana Maria will actually speak about this a bit later. And the Argentinian government to invite leading Swiss geologist and explorer Leo Werley to photograph the territory in order to support its political agenda vis-a-vis neighboring countries and make way for its developmental ideology. So Maria, I really want to start asking, in the first page of your text, you make a statement about the plains of the Patagonia that I really find extraordinary, and I quote you here. It says, "This is a place that could only be described in the negative, without habitations, without water, without trees, without mountains." Can you elaborate further on this idea of describing a place in the negative, or in negative terms? And given the focus of this volume of Manifest, maybe you can refer to how the use and obviously their effectiveness of the different representational tools, such as photography, cartography, drawings, diagrams, so on, have helped perpetuate this narrative and describe the vastness of the plains of Patagonia.
Yes, sure. Thank you, first of all, for the invitation to be here participating at this conversation. Regarding the question, yes, I would like to stress first that the descriptions mentioned here are written by foreigners. Maybe this is what discovery and exploration have been about, namely looking at something that has always been there, but with new eyes, discovering places that are different from one's own homeland. It is, in fact, quite difficult to make discoveries in your own backyard. Take me, for example. I was born in Argentina, and Patagonia is the place where I spent my childhood, happy memories. But I don't remember ever noticing the landscape. It was just there as a background. I never paid too much attention to it. I never noticed the barren land or the strong winds. But I do have a very distinct memory of trees and green and very lush landscape when I encountered when I was 9 and I moved to Italy with my family. And I also have a very distinct memory of coming back to Argentina on vacation after a few years. And it was then at that point that I heard the wind, that I saw the barren landscape, because at that point I had something to compare it with. Right. So when Darwin or Fitzroy explored Patagonia and described it in the negative terms, what they were actually doing was comparing Patagonia with their homeland. What they actually meant was that if we compare Patagonia with England, then we can say that it is without habitations, without water, without trees, without mountains. But then the whole purpose of these expeditions was to find the different animals, different plants, different minerals, different people. And of course, all these could then be conquered. So yes, they found a vast territory, and even vastness is also a relative concept. It is established in relation to something smaller. It is the familiar that gives somehow the scale of the unfamiliar. And again, vastness can be conquered, and the way to do it is by using familiar tools. So we are talking here of learned people, cultivated gentlemen, and the tools they had at their disposal were scientific tools. So cartography, drawings, written accounts, and later also photography. These tools allowed explorers, geographers, geologists to document, to map, to study these vast territories, somehow to conquer these territories through knowledge. But let me point out that photography, cartography, drawings, and written accounts are not innocent, even when they are produced by scientists. Right. They are always used in response to an agenda, and no matter what tool you choose, in the end, it's the agenda that steers the course, and be it economical or political.
Right. And you also described this territory, like you said, as it was encountered by different people, but certainly at different times, and like you mentioned, with different agenda and different purposes. I was wondering if you could reflect on the rework that you did about these stories, but also, so what kind of changes as the accounts of these immensities are accumulated, and what remains the same?
Yes, maybe we can make an example. So Swiss geographers and geologists, as you mentioned, Arnold Heim and Leo Verli, were hired by the Argentinian government to survey the Andean area in 1896. And they produced marvelous photographs. Today we look at this work and it's really poetic. Right. But they were not naive about it. On the contrary, they were quite self-conscious about the fact that the result of their efforts was not innocent. In fact, at one point, Verli realized that the government was going to use his photographs to influence the border demarcation treaties with Chile, for example. And of course, he didn't like it one bit. He packed up his cameras and his photographs, and he left the country for good. And this is why today we access these photographs at the archives of the ETH in Zurich, and not at the La Plata Museum of Natural History. And this is why those images were never used propagandistically for nation building purposes. Another interesting example is Egidio Feruglio. He was also a geologist, and he was hired in 1925 as chief of YPF's geological team. And the guy deployed a variety of tools to compile the 3 volumes of his Descripción Geológica de la Patagonia. And again, he used photographs, drawings, and cartography. And as it has been the case with Verli, he was aware of the limitations of his work. The work was titled Geological Description of Patagonia, but because the purpose of the job was to find oil, only the meseta was really studied. The Andean region, where there was no oil, was understudied. And he knew that, and he wrote about it very explicitly. And then again, because the Andean region remained understudied, it was also seen as a mythical place worthy of exploration and conquest, but a very different kind of conquest. The Fitzroy Peak became a challenge. Mountaineers came to Patagonia from all over the world in the 1950s to conquer it. And again, we see here photographs, videos, and written accounts. And they were used to build up and perpetuate the idea of vastness. I guess what changes is the underlying purpose of these descriptions. The tools don't change. Even today, we still deploy the same old tools. We have maps. Maybe they are just Google Maps. We have photographs. Today we post them on Instagram. We have written accounts, Twitter maybe, but we assign them a completely different meaning. I would also say that we could still use the same old material, the photos by Verli, the stratigraphy by Feruglio, the films by Struve, to tell a completely different story. Think about it. We could totally use the oil maps to talk about Anthropocene, climate change, and all the evils that affect our daily lives.
Right.
And because we are addressing a completely different public, I believe that the same old materials would be as effective as they were a century ago.
All right, thanks. So maybe we will continue with Ana Maria, whose contribution, Bones of the Nation, follows Moreno as he ventures to collect evidence of past life in the Pampas and convert them into a national story through ethically questionable scientific and museological decisions that laid the foundation to the Museum of La Plata. The text makes the connection between the architecture of the museum, the urban plan of the city of La Plata, and the plains that support its development. Entonces, Ana María, en tu trabajo traza de manera bastante sorprendente la manera en que la historia, las gentes, el método científico, tuvieron que ser modificados o digamos, manipulados de cierta manera para apoyar o para sostener una narrativa que era bastante grandiosa y nacionalista, ¿no? Tu trabajo es específico al estado argentino de La Plata, pero me pregunto si puedes elaborar de manera o la manera específica en este caso, que claramente está ligado a la inmensidad, la descripción y la narrativa, se diferencia, digamos, a la de los países vecinos.
Gracias, Mauricio, and thanks, Anthony and Dan, for hosting this event. Y gracias por permitirme meter un poquito de español en esta conversación.
Claro.
En el caso argentino hay algo muy específico que me interesaba tratar en el texto, que es esa intersección o traslapo entre el encuentro de estos grandes restos, ¿verdad? De estos hallazgos paleontológicos, ¿verdad? De estos grandes mastodontes que van a crear gran interés de científicos y de aficionados también. Y esto coincide, el paso de Darwin, que sale también, digamos, en el ensayo de Mariana, va a coincidir con el genocidio de grupos, lo que se llama en Argentina pueblos originarios, ¿verdad? De grupos indígenas y específicamente estoy hablando de los Jauniquén, Cotehuelche. So I'm saying there's this sort of overlap between these, the finding these remains and the genocide of indigenous populations. Y es esta coincidencia que se hace muy específica, digamos, de lo que ocurre en Argentina y que me interesaba, porque estas historias se las conoce, ¿verdad?, en Argentina, pero me interesaba pensar en la intersección y en estas complicidades, digamos, entre ciencia, capital, tecnología y violencia, básicamente, con una estrategia narrativa muy precisa, que es la que uso en el ensayo, que es un cambio de escalas muy radical, que comienza con este punto de vista global, se va acercando, sigue los barcos, ¿verdad? Sigue el desarrollo ferroviario, llega al museo, llega al cuerpo, ¿verdad? Entonces, este cambio de escala, y me dio mucho gusto que Dan me dijo, mira el escrito de Swati, porque es una estrategia narrativa y que le encontré mucho eco en el ensayo de ella también. I'm just briefly saying that this specific intersection was the reason I chose a very specific narrative strategy for the essay, which is a sort of constant scale change, going from the global, following the train tracks, right? There's a sort of constant zooming in and out that's very deliberate as a way of approaching this specific problem, and that I really appreciated Dan sort of pointing out Swati's essay to me, because it really resonated, her argument on the necessity for a scale change to sort of think about bigness.
Y en un momento de tu texto, un momento clave, describes como el cuerpo de, y voy a tratar de pronunciarlo bien, Lonco Modesto Incayal, un jefe tehuelche, se incorpora al Museo de la Plata para reforzar esta narrativa de la que estás hablando, y se introduce primero como un espécimen vivo y luego como un espécimen anatómico, o al menos así entendí yo la traducción. Y bueno, en este caso, que claramente es horrífico, la inmensidad se ve redefinida a través del desplazamiento de un cuerpo, ¿no?, a un tiempo, a un lugar y de una forma diferente, ¿no? ¿Podrías elaborar, ya que lo mencionaste, de qué manera piensas que la inmensidad o esta idea del territorio se ve registrada o impresa o inclusive desafiada a través de la idea del cuerpo?
Bueno, en este caso, a mí lo que me interesaba, aquí hay un aspecto también de la inmensidad del tiempo.
Claro.
De retroceder de una manera violenta, desplazar estos cuerpos, que son varios, desplazarlos en el tiempo al ponerlos junto a esta exhibición, ¿verdad?, de restos paleontológicos, que es una manera de evadir el genocidio indígena y decir, bueno, estas son especímenes de un pasado remoto. So I'm saying there's an issue of immensity of time displacement here, that in exhibiting these remains, because there were several of them, along with sort of distant mammals from a remote past, there's a political displacement of these bodies to that remote past that is violent, right? Ahí está la violencia de lo que hace el museo, es justamente ese desplazamiento que coincide con la construcción de un Estado argentino mítico, de esta comunidad imaginaria.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias. We will continue with Enrique Ramirez, whose text, Wallaceae Economium, follows a literary discovery as Notes on Immensity by David Foster Wallace, a favorite of a lot of us, that are being exposed in his archive and connected to Enrique's own musing on the presence and incongruency of immensity in the American experience. So, Enrique, your work, which is a text about a text, opens the window into descriptions of descriptions, or to put it in another way, of a world shaped by piles and piles of previous encounters processed through the consciousness of others, right? So, for instance, you look at the landscape you grew up in, and still it seems foreign until you recite The Great Gatsby, and suddenly it all sort of makes sense. Do you think working by proxy is a desirable technique if one is to know the territory, or is it an escape from the direct encounters?
That's a really good question, and thank you to the organizers, first of all, for organizing this event. This is a really this is a really beautiful publication, and I'm really happy to be part of this. And I should just explain one thing. My contribution is quite small compared to Mariana and Ana Maria's, so it's literally like, I think 3 pages or something like that in the text. It's basically
it's bigger than big.
It's bigger than big, smaller than small. Yeah, it operates at the exact opposite scale of what Mariana and Ana Maria are writing about. But back to your question, Mauricio, it's a really great question, and you're right. This is a work. The work is a text about a text. But I also want to emphasize that the writing of history is, as you described, as you kind of alluded to in your question, it's shaping a world with piles and piles of previous encounters. That's what we do as historians. All texts are encounters. So when we use the word context, for example, when we look at something, we want to know the historical context, we're also describing an encounter with a text that is moored to a specific place and time. And I want to clarify something about the quote from The Great Gatsby, which is one of the most famous ones from the history of modern literature. And I don't know if it's accurate to say that I needed F. Scott Fitzgerald's words in order to make sense of the landscape.
Right.
The way I see it, reading the landscape through the words of writers like Fitzgerald or even Wallace, allows me to experience something different in the landscape, something that I had never seen before. Much like Mariana was saying, that like, the landscape was something that was there, and it wasn't not until later that she heard the sound or knew the trees or knew the mountains. So, and like same with me, it's like through a text, I can experience something different in the landscape, something that I would not have seen before. Now, as you may know from the contribution to this, my contribution to Manifest number 3, I found this piece in David Foster Wallace's archive at the Harry Ransom Center at the University of Texas, which is to say that I found a sheet of yellow legal pad on which Wallace had written this excerpt, right? Which to say that I had to decipher Wallace's minuscule handwriting in order to make a passable transcription, which is to say that this was a direct encounter, not working by proxy. I was literally confronting a text that was right in front of me. And working in the Ransom Center, I should say, it's a vast repository dedicated to the history of literature and the performing arts. And while I was there, I felt as if we're in a kind of architectural manifestation of a landscape. Not so much, Jorge Luis Borges' Tower of Babel. Right. This is a comparison that's easy to make, of course, as we are tangentially and spatially and tenuously moored to Argentina here. But maybe something like Sandro Botticelli's map of Dante's Inferno from 1480 or Athanasius Kircher's Tower of Babel from 1679. These are 2 works that depict the literal transformation text, not so much into architecture, but into something vaster, something more immense. So is working like this desirable? Well, all historians work with texts and archives, which means that working like this is unavoidable. Right. But I think you may be alluding to a bigger question, which is one about the kinds of texts that we use to write histories of buildings, cities, and landscapes. In other words, why am I so invested in using novels, right? These kinds of like mysterious things that are so subjective and just something that we're not really accustomed to kind of introducing into our historical analyses. So I should say that I'm not just a writer, but I'm also a reader, right? And so as a reader, I find solace in books. And one book that I find solace in when I'm dealing with these issues is The Allure of the Archive by the French social historian Arlette Farge. She wrote this book after spending 2 years at the archives of the Bastille. And in one of the images that always comes to mind, and a word that she uses to describe what she finds there is landscape. She continues using the word landscape to describe what is in the archive. This is a quote from the book. She says, quote, Words are windows. They will let you catch a glimpse of one or several contexts, but words can also be tangled and contradictory. They can articulate inconsistencies whose meaning is far from clear. And just when you think you have finally discovered the framework underlying the way events unfolded and individuals acted, opaqueness and contradiction begin to creep in. Incongruous spaces emerge with no apparent connection to the landscape that seemed to be taking shape only a few documents earlier. So in this passage, the historian and the archive is one who stitches texts together to make sense of the, quote, incongruous spaces into something more coherent, something like a landscape.
It is so refreshing to hear a writer admits that he's a reader first. But I just wanted to ask another question, because the Wallace test is really beautiful, and you're a very lucky man to have it in front of you and transcribe it. But I actually find it equally poetic and cynic when he states in that little last paragraph, he states that ducts, and I quote the text that you wrote, exude an oily material that insulates them watertight as the finest clear plastic wrap. And if that material's integrity is compromised in some fashion, a duct must suffer the effects of the elements it lives in. An unoiled duct must feel what feeds it, holds it up, take its shit, cooperates with the emotion of orange feet. The prognosis for a clean duct is, according to a duct specialist, often grim. So I'm really curious, do you think our capability or the use of representation, you just mentioned novels and text, or descriptions, are that oily, watertight plastic wrap that allows us to grasp with immensity and vastness without suffering, both physically and emotionally, the effects of its elements? And what's your prognosis for these representations and strategies when their integrity is clearly compromised, as the work of Mariana and Ana Maria's testifies to?
Well, the short answer to the first part of the question is yes. But let me elaborate a little bit on the second part of that question.
Right.
So, and I really do like these questions because they bring up the issue about how words are used to conjure spaces and landscapes that are in our minds. These are the things that we're picturing as we're confronting a text. Now, about your point about oily wraps, right? If we can think of an oily wrap that protects us as we're trying to comprehend the immensity of the landscape or whatever, let me for a second play devil's advocate and advocate for something that is the opposite, right? So I'm thinking here, and I'm going to use references to other books, and I'm thinking here of a passage from Zama. It's a novel written in 1956 by the Argentinian writer Antonio Di Benedetto. In this novel, in the third section, it begins with a description of Vicuña Porto, who's a famous criminal who's like kind of hiding out in the watery landscapes of Paraguay. And in describing Vicuña Porto, Di Benedetto writes, esta la traducción en inglés, obviamente, pero, I don't have the Spanish version in front of me, so we're going to just have to deal with the English one. I'm sorry. So, but this is the description of Vicuña Porto by Antonio Di Benedetto. It says Vicuña Porto was like the river. He grew with the rains. Water poured down from upon the earth, from the torrid sky, and the current would swell. Meanwhile, Vicuña Porto seemed to emanate from the diligently irrigated soil. It's a great description of a way a character is conjured from the watery landscape. But to go back to the original question about these oily kind of like veneers that we need to protect ourselves, I'm also thinking of another passage from another novel. It's this one from Machado de Assis's 1881 novel, The Posthumous Life of Blas Cubas, where the narrator, who's telling us a story from beyond the grave, admonishes the reader with these words, quote, "The greatest defect of this book is you, reader. You are in a hurry to grow old, and the book moves slowly. You love direct, sturdy narration, a regular and fluent style, and this book and my style are like drunkards. They sway right and left, stop and go, moan, roar, cackle, threaten the skies, slip and fall. This is to say, on the one hand, that the book is slippery, ungraspable, which is the book. The text is the thing that is wrapped in this kind of oily sheath, not the reader, right? But then again, it's a great metaphor for the immensity of the landscape, something that runs along a timeline that is imperceptible to you, because the thing that the book is talking about is immense in itself and older than time itself. So about the prognoses for these ducks that are being mentioned in this
Right.
quote from the piece, I think the prognosis is pretty good. I mean, I'm not an ornithologist, but I'll pretend to be one right now. But when you read Mariana's and Ana Maria's contributions, you get the sense that there is a way to counter this immensity, or if not to counter it, then at least to confront it and to embrace it, because what we see in these contributions by Ana Maria and Mariana, Mariana's stratigraphic study of the heights, depths, and expanses of Patagonia, and Ana Maria's portrayal of how the cultural techniques of heritage preservation and museology can erase the memories of past lives. What we see in here are the willingness of writers and historians to make a slight turn from conventional understandings of the immensity of our landscape and to enter another dimension of historical time, but on their own terms.
Well, thank you so much. Those are really great answers. And I think now we have to move on with Anna and Dan and Anthony. But I really want to thank the three of you, not only for your text, but also for your questions and participation. We'll never see the Patagonia or museums, certainly not docs, the same way as we saw before. So thank you very much. And Anna.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mauricio. And we just continue with everybody. I just want to try to articulate towards Anthony and Dan. This was really great. Thank you for the interventions. The questions were clearly improvised. No, I'm joking, because they were very, very good questions and amazing answers at all levels. I really enjoyed it. And I want to do this kind of traveling from the scale of the article towards the scale of the journal in kind of 3 steps, let's say, roughly speaking. And we will derail, hopefully, and we will go into interesting directions. So we are not on a script. But I wanted to start by asking any of you, Anthony or Dan, about this particular choice, of the complementarity that the Pampa and the Patagonia establish with all the differences. But I mean, it's very strategic, I feel, the fact that there are these 2 articles in the first part of the magazine, speaking of these parts of the territory of Argentina, in these terms as well, like the more Darwinian on the one side, and then the more kind of political and colonizing condition of the Pampas. And I was wondering, how did you approach this? Was it a conscious strategy? Was it an emerging condition? And how in general is the process of selection of these articles that keep kind of pairing up and being singles, but also serious and generate form?
I could start and Anthony would follow up, I imagine. I think actually it's a very good example, Mariana's and Ana Maria's texts, to what I think is an interesting part of what we try to do, which is basically include texts that are not only interesting in themselves, but they also engage in some sort of conversation. So you have something that is, to me, it's more akin to an exhibition, perhaps, that you go and you see one thing and then you see another thing, and then you create these sort of links by yourself. So, of course, in this case, it's very clear because the texts deal with the same territory. They even feature some of the same figures, right? Moreno is featured in both of them and some others, and some sites are featured in both of them. But to me, in some cases, the links are not necessarily these explicit, but it still works. And in terms of the process, I think it's a very complicated question to answer, So of course, we didn't know that we're going to get these specific two texts, right, when we published the call for contributions. But once we got them, I think it really fed a discussion between the three of us, the editors, in how this creates some sort of a narrative that could really, I think, create the foundations for the first part, for the first thematic part of this issue.
I see. No, that's interesting. Yeah, it's true that there are these resonances of approach. At the same time, while I was reading both of them, they are very different as well. So I think that was very interesting. Like you could see different agendas, but then it has the shared theme. So I think that was very, very impressive to me, like in terms of how it works together. And then when you propose the text on Wallace, and I was thinking of what Anthony says in the part of the editorial text on this issue, which he says that you need a lot of voices to actually, describe the culture or work on the culture of description. And you both put a lot of emphasis on being specific. You kind of punctuate a lot that you want to take a close look, like the problem of immensity. And also you mentioned that it was almost, there was a point where you thought you were not going to make it, right? Like you wanted to look at immensity closely. And that seemed at a certain extent like a geological time that was going to take you guys to do so. And I was wondering about this position, about looking at immensity, but stating that it's going to be done by means of close look and close description of very specific, yet multifacetic kind of descriptions, right? Because it's not that any of you guys, of you three, are describing something that is enclosed, but it's something that kind of unpacks a multiplicity. And yeah, I just wanted to know what you were thinking about this kind of statement, how naive it was or how conscious it was in terms of being a self-challenge, right?
It's definitely a challenge, that's for sure. And I think for us, I mean, this is such an elegant way to describe the journal as you've just done, Anna, which I want to thank you and of course, Ditella and all of the contributors we have here tonight and Mauricio for coming together. I think the ability to bring lots of different people into conversation is one of the things that I think we value very much, as Dan was saying. And one of the reasons that we wanted to do a journal instead of, say, a book or like a monograph or an edited volume per se is because we really wanted to see this as a way to explore the Americas and to invite others to do the same. So we really see each writer in many ways as a kind of intrepid explorer. Whether that's through an engagement literally with physical text, like Enrique was describing so beautifully, or the way in which Ana Maria and Mariana get us to rethink and reorient how we look at the world around us. So I think it's this kind of multum in parvo, which I don't speak any Latin, but as far as I know, it means like the many and the small. And so that was in a way our means to try to engage immensity, I would say. But we have a habit of taking on or biting a lot more than we can chew. And certainly with this, we moved at a glacial pace, but like a glacier, we also got to pick some things up along the way, which was also really quite wonderful to get to take on in the journal.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, it's a beautiful object as well. And so maybe to jump into a kind of the structure that it's of which is composed, because just also to kind of introduce different things for the people that don't have it in their hands. The journal, this issue is organized around three kind of titles. The first one is Matter, and Mariana's and Ana Maria's pieces are under this title. The second is Scale, and the third is Description, in which Enrique's piece is inscribed. And I wanted to ask you how are these categories? And Dan was already answering some of this, kind of shape the content and the other way around. I mean, why Matter, Scale, and Description? And also, I wanted to introduce the fact that you have like an extra kind of set of pieces, and there is another editorial kind of text there that articulates a sort of current, if I can say, set of interventions that link with topics like equality policies in LA or COVID or Black Lives Matter. And I wanted to ask you guys what happened there? How does it do, if you think that still relates to immensity in a certain way, like another kind of ungraspable totality, or how is but mostly what are these three parts for you, and what is the extra part contributing on this structure?
Maybe I would actually start with the extra part, because this was kind of an interesting problem we found ourselves facing once we realized that this moved in a certain pace. And by the way, I really liked Enrique's quote, "This book moves slowly," kind of thing. And I find a lot of beauty in that, but that's perhaps for another extension of this conversation. But I think because we moved so extremely slowly with that, for many reasons, some of them very mundane and some of them editorial. So some of them were conceptual and some were just, because of whatever circumstances we found ourselves in. But suddenly we realized that, things were happening in a different pace in the last couple of years. And there are many things in these events that we all know of these past years that reflect back on immensity, right? So it's not only a question of let's bring in the news of what was happening outside, because I think that's not really what the journal is trying to do. But I think we needed to find a way to bring these reflections into our slow project, okay? And I think, for instance, what Anna-Maria was saying before, that, the text by Swati that deals with infrastructure and questions of how scale is becoming a sort of lens through which to rethink certain habits or certain ways in which the world was shaped, so to speak. These are exactly the type of responses that we found so valuable, right? So we approached a new set of writers, asking them to reflect on the same subjects of immensity, etc., that were present in the original call for contributions, but through the current moment, right? So they collapsed these two things together, and I think we got some very powerful pieces, but also new layers to this entire issue and the subjects that we were trying to raise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I understand. I didn't know that it was like literally so kind of articulated in like two stages of reflection so much. But it's interesting this idea of time, and there is a lot of references in the text and it's like very loaded, and it just happened, also in this kind of presentations. And this, I'm just thinking about this now, and please, if any of you, Enrique, Mariana, Ana Maria, you want to intervene at any point here, please do, feel free to do it. But in terms of this understanding of time, maybe in the pieces of how did you kind of think of how you would organize the problem of the perception of time as on itself a problem of difficult to grasp or difficult, because it's not so much only material what you're speaking about in many terms. Like I feel like all your pieces, what it generates is the kind of the notion of not being able to grasp the whole argument in a single kind of component, right? And no, I was wondering in terms of what Dan just said regarding the contemporaneity, because I think for you all there is a contemporaneity to what you were writing. It's not about kind of reflecting back. So how do you think, or just any of you, or even Mauricio, and just opening this, because I think it's good that we kind of interact. How do you think about this idea of the present influencing the interpretation back to certain topics that have been written about and have been reflected upon, but now it's kind of relevant to bring up again, right? And in this shape and form. So yeah, maybe if anyone wants to.
Yes, no, sí, no. Para mí fue muy interesante. Yo estuve en el panel de SIH que organizaron como que un prólogo a la edición. Entonces un poco como que estaba pensando en el tema con Anthony, Dan, Justin por algún tiempo, y luego apliqué al Call for Papers, pero habiendo trabajado en el tema, esta extensión de tiempo, digamos, que le llevó a la revista salir, también coincidió con un interés de mi parte y acciones muy específicas frente al discurso de colonización y un interés muy específico en confrontar los discursos de académicos indígenas en América del Norte con discursos a veces faltantes en América del Sur, que hablamos, digamos, que los hay discursos indígenas, pero donde el asunto de colonial ha sobrecedido al asunto de decolonización, es decir, que hay más discurso de parte de académicos no indígenas en Sudamérica, y este discurso un poco ha sobrecedido al discurso indígena. Just briefly, that the long sort of coming out of the journal, the long process of the journal coincided because I was sort of part of it early on with my involvement and interest in sort of questions of both decoloniality and decolonization and the contrast and sort of displacement in South America of indigenous discourse, because there has been just a predominance of Latin American settlers speaking of decoloniality, which has superseded the very present and existent indigenous scholars in South America discussing indigeneity.
Yeah, that's great. Just pointing out, I mean, I was asking this, and Julian, who is the director of the History and Theory program, masters at the school, I think was asking something similar, and I maybe most properly stated is on the chat. He says, I would like to ask the panelists to address the contextual conditions, cultural, political, that make the idea of the journal opportune at the particular juncture at which we stand. So it's kind of better put what we started. So let's continue it. I think that was very clear, Mariana. I would follow up, but I think maybe, sorry, Ana Maria. Mariana, if you want to intervene, and then we can.
Yes, for me, it was important to build more of a narrative, just picking and choosing certain examples, regardless of the timeline. And for me, the issue to address was the construction of an infrastructure, and now I see this the building of this pipeline as very problematic for our contemporary moment. But I just wanted, because for me, Argentina is not something that the history of Argentina I had to study. It's not something that I learned in school. So I went back to it now, actually. So for me, it was a discovery of my own somehow history. But of course, you do it when you have a different age. You don't do it when you're a child. So you are much more critical about what you're learning. And so for me, the construction of this pipeline was kind of a way to unlock and a way to study more of a history of my country.
Yeah.
Perhaps I would add that as a sort of editorial project, so again, it goes back to the sequencing of pieces, I think. So a single piece could be leaning towards the purely historical, but the way you put it in the way you organize the chapter or the context for it within the part in which it's placed in the magazine, I think for us is a way to to use this proximity to make a contemporary argument. So this I think is the craft, or what I hope is the craft of sort of our editorial approach.
Mm-hmm.
Just to add to that, much like historical time runs at a time that's representational, not actual time, I feel like one of the benefits of of a journal-based publication is that it can be nimble and it can kind of like create its own kind of timeline that kind of like can act against or with, you know, current events. As Mariana and then, you know, and, you know, Ana Maria, who just published a book, of course, no, it's like the timeline of book publishing is rather slow and arduous. And one of the wonderful things about a publication like this is that it can be responsive and it can be flexible and it can be malleable. And it's, you know, I don't want to speak for the editors here, but I imagine that it's a situation where some things that are left unresolved can be revisited in previous iterations of the journal, subsequent issues and whatnot.
Yeah, I think that versatility it's really present. I mean, it's really worked upon. No, it's not just that it happens because of the format. Yeah, and Anthony, I don't know if you were going to say something on that point.
I was just going to follow up on these really great points that everybody else had made, and I think sometimes the way that I think of the journal, because of the slow rate at which we move, but also the into the abyss portion that you had raised, Anna, is we're a little bit like in Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, the two tramps, Estragon and Vladimir. You know, they don't really do anything. Not that we don't do anything, trust me, we do a lot of heavy lifting for the journal, despite how long it takes. But they have a discussion about the four Gospels in the Bible. And they say, how is it possible that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were all witnessing Jesus Christ being crucified, and none of them can agree on the numbers that were crucified and how many went to heaven and how many didn't? So all of these people watched the holiest of holy of things, right, for Christians, evidently, and they didn't get their act together in the four Gospels to agree on all of the characters and the actions that happen. And I think for us, we kind of see the journal as a space to not only have that conversation, but also engage those very different viewpoints of witnessing and the subjectivity of witnessing in general.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah, I was thinking, it kind of shocked me what you just mentioned, Anthony. Honestly, it got me into another kind of line of thought. It got me thinking of issue 2, of course, and maybe we will get there. But because I was thinking, okay, bigger than big as a title, and it resonates, I don't have to say, with how many things. Like why, regarding this idea of the kind of meaning to bring up certain things, and actually what is on the back of my mind is the idea of Americas in plural, which we have discussed in kind of previous conversation, the idea of the Americas. How do you think about that? Because I think bringing up, it's like, to me, bringing up this topic, and it has a span of years. I mean, it's like Enrique was saying, okay, I understand and I agree that it has this kind of self-made timeline that is more kind of delimited, but also you have to be very precise, because if you raise up the problem of the Americas, and this is going to unfold in several numbers, like what are the projections that you are making? And also, you guys were saying, we're going to look inward, then we are going to look to the kingdoms of God, and then we are going to look to bigger than big. Like, how does it happen? Like, how do you unpack this, which is, it's not, I'm pretty sure it's not completely a priori, like you found it on the way. So, but now if you had to conceptualize it a little bit, besides like the everyday life tendencies that you may cross, how would you speak about what you set up as a kind of friction with the today, the friction with the way America is approached, the friction with how looking into America inward is approached, and the other two, like the idea of kingdoms as, and I want to pick up in both of yours editorial tendencies, because when you read Anthony has all these kind of dichotomies. Like in the kingdoms of God, he wants to say, this is not about Latin or Anglo-Saxon, this has to be superseded, right? And when you look inwards, it's like, it's not about America, blah, blah, blah. So you set up these dichotomies, and then what Dan does is to say, I'm looking from outside. What are the opportunities? What is the opportunity of building this kind of massive kind of religious complexes that are not evaluated critically by the discipline, by the historians in the discipline, right? What is the opportunity of these things? What is the opportunity of looking at America, something that has this kind of atrophia of resources? So I was thinking, because you consistently write the three, and Justin unfortunately is not here, but you consistently write in parallel, complementing each other and building up on the same timeline, like three interests that somehow merge, no? So just, I'm complexifying the question because I just want to pose this last kind of scale, and I really want to open up to Manuel's questions and all, but just to wrap up the final kind of scale. How is this, for you, how is this working? What are you thinking now? How is this issue making you reflect upon the previous ones? What is happening now in your heads, and what is the reactions that this is kind of provoking you?
Well, I'll try to answer that because it's quite a complicated question, because you need to compress like 8 years of work, more or less, which is the three issues. But to me, what is interesting is that we began this project like 8 or 9 years ago, based on the kind of striking understanding that people are not, people in our fields are not so much interested in America. We were at a certain school, you were there as well. Nobody was interested in America, the Americas, America, United States, South America. Nobody really dealt with that apart from occasional studios. Most of the people were looking overseas for their inspiration and projects. This was a different time, of course, economically, but this was after the crisis. So it was not like the heyday of architectural superstars. It was still just considered uninteresting. And I think what happened in these last couple of years is that many people suddenly realized that it is interesting, or even if it's not interesting to them, at least they should know more about it. And I think it has a lot to do with the political situation, and people suddenly understanding that there are certain things happening between the two coasts, and these things that are happening there could change who's elected president in the United States, but also things happening south of the border suddenly have certain influences. And so this became I think more and more relevant in a way. So it caught up with our intuition in some ways, and I think today is I would say it's even more relevant. And it's even more relevant not only to know more about this geographical unit that we call the Americas, but know more, but try hard not to oversimplify it and not unify it into one system or one thing, because I think it's a very complex, it's complex in almost any way, right? Geographically, ethnically, culturally, historically. And this provide to me, at least, and again, I'm an outsider in this, I'm not from there, but I think it provides, a lot of opportunities, as you said, to our, disciplines and associated disciplines. It's not only, architecture or anything like that. I think we gradually realized during this process that we want to deal much more with landscape, of course, geography, the sciences, literature, which became a really important thing for us. And, I think having all of these kind of lenses provides us with new opportunities to discuss these realities and not be surprised by them every time.
Yeah, it was definitely inspiring that where we studied, someone had told us that no one serious looks at the Americas. And this was somebody who, without revealing too much, is very much from a part of the United States that is oftentimes overlooked. So that was quite telling for us. And there again, I mean, I think how to go about exploring the process of doing the journal, though one of the things that's very arduous is that the three of us all have the same number of votes. So despite how oftentimes I know Dan wishes I had 2 votes to his 1, we have to do everything democratically. So that also plays out in terms of the issues and the themes that we have as well. So if there's 2 votes for something, then it goes, even though, you know, I might dissent, or rarely Dan dissents. It's usually Justin or me. I'm kidding. It's pretty even. But that's one of the ways that we work internally. And so, and we do a kind of call for papers to try to, you know, get as much in as possible. There's also just a lot that like people kind of drop off at a certain point and don't give us their final pieces too. So we've had lots of those as well that could fill another 2 volumes, I think, of the journal, through no fault of our own, I have to say. But it's that kind of exploratory process that I think what makes it so worthwhile for us to do this.
Mauricio, were you jumping in?
No, I was just curious. I wanted, because now that they gave the timeline to the magazine, I was really, if you think about when it started, and again, this famous school that you guys are mentioning, that was truly during the crisis years, and then it went to, so that was kind of like one America, and then there were the Obama years, that was kind of like another America, and now you've gone through another sort of political panorama. And so I wonder, what has, similar to Mariana, what has remained and what has changed of that Americanness that you have witnessed throughout the life of the magazine, which is pretty much the last 10 most tumultuous years in quite a while in North America, right?
I want to piggyback on that question, and let you answer, but it's like a plus to Mauricio's question. I was looking at the website and I noticed in the first issue, it's called Manifest, a Journal of American Architecture and Urbanism. Mm-hmm. And then you change it to a Journal of the Americas. So that's a piggyback on Mauricio's question. Why that change?
Well, I think it's a very good question. I think, you know, part of the reason we decided to change it was exactly that, right? That we realized that looking at it at such a complex reality, I would say, through you know, predefined disciplinary lenses is not enough. So, you know, architecture and urbanism, and I think in a way this was the impetus for this 3rd issue, that urbanism and architecture are not enough. Even landscape architecture is not enough because it carries so much disciplinary baggage. And, you know, the inspiration for the bigger than big, you know, which is a kind of funny title, right? So on the one hand, it's a homage to John Stilgoe, who wrote like an introductory piece for our first issue. But it's also funny because it's like a, you know, it's an oxymoron, right? It's bigger than big because it cannot be really described. It's like these experiences that you don't really know how to describe to someone who wasn't there. But for us, this was exactly, you know, a moment of realization that in order to grasp this subject somehow, which we found was so profoundly important to understand, you know, Americanness, whatever that may be to different people. But in order to do so, we felt we need, you know, to widen our perspective, you know, and another thing I just wanted to mention here, because I think it's important, is that apart from taking pieces or liking pieces that are, I mean, texts and visual contributions that are, you know, historically sound or very scholarly responsible, we also like or prefer that these pieces are also pleasurable, you know, because I think there's a gap somehow in our fields that doesn't allow enough literary experimentation. And in a way, this is also part of what we think is important. So how to describe something is also important, and not only what you describe.
Just want
to briefly, oh, sorry, go ahead, Enrique.
Real briefly, this is a really great discussion, and it kind of like kind of want to dovetail this discussion to you know, to just an earlier comment that was made about like the role of a journal in these times. And to me, one of the benefits of writing in this capacity is that it allows one to engage with writing, or to write as a form of contestation. And I kind of speak that, from my own experience in graduate programs. Like, every single mode of writing that I engaged, it was a form of protest against someone who said that I couldn't do it. And I think one of the challenges these days is to now I've been out of graduate school now for a while now, but it's like, how do you imbue writing with a point of view that is your own, that is personal, and that is unmistakably so. And I think that's where you can start. That opens up many opportunities for to bring in your personal histories, your kind of like political, your views on different kinds of events and whatnot. And I want to say that it began with me with the very first thing that I wrote for Manifest, which was the very first issue, which was this like weird thing. And I think I wrote it because I was really burned out from graduate school. So I wrote this thing about Bob Dylan at the Newport Folk Festival. And what's interesting is that he has this song called Bob Dylan's 115th Dream, which is kind of like he's reimagining kind of the originary myth of the United States or of America. And it was a really liberating thing for me to write and to listen to, which is because it kind of like afforded me the opportunity to kind of like imbue my own kind of like observation of like what a history could be. And so, and it also reminds me of like, one of the things that I've been, one of the types of literature that I've been reading a lot of these days have been landscape narratives, particularly writings by Robert Macfarlane, which are always, it's always, the writing is something that really, really engages kind of, I think, what this latest issue is about, which is kind of this extreme oscillation in scales, right? About a particular writer's very personal experience with this kind of like immense thing. And I think it's like, I'm very, very grateful, of course, for the opportunity to kind of like write these things or kind of make these contributions that, are not, do not necessarily fit into what I'm supposed to be doing as, as an academic writer, but then again, I do take reading quite seriously. And the thing is like, which affords me the opportunity to read, for example, the contributions by Mariana and Ana Maria, these anagrammatic names, which kind of are like combinations of each other. Which is great because it's like if I'm in the middle of them, like
just a reader.
It's just like I'm just it's like this nice like bookend between these like very similar. Anyway, so and I'm trying. This is a very long-winded way to try to answer one of the questions that I saw in the comments, which is basically about how to become responsive. And there was an article about there was a question about geology, I think, in there as well.
I wanted to introduce them, but I think it's great to read the question after the response. So you just responded, and I'm going to read the question you responded to, which is from Manuel. And Manuel was asking, how does the journal relate with Manifest as a genre? And also, what is this tradition proposing in terms of radical political programs? And I think Enrique just answered that. And I think it's very interesting, and it linked with what Dan was saying about the literature embedded in the pieces, which is part of the curatorial, I would say, because you were saying this is not only, this is kind of a project of edition and curating at many levels, and I think that was very nice. Let me go through this set of questions, because you were picking up on the geological one, which brings us a little bit back, but maybe I would frame it because what Emiliano is asking, if I understand well, is also, if you work, let's say in this, or if you think, because he's using the word think, if you think in these geological kind of terms, what does it imply for the narratives, the theory, and the history? What does it imply in terms of how do you work with the materials of history, the materials of theory, to look at them like that? I think it's interesting that it seems like you put a lens on, which is this geological lens, and then what does it do to the materials? What do you think?
I can try and answer that. I think we have some very interesting pieces that try to do exactly that in the journal. So we have, for instance, a piece by Lydia Zinogala, who's basically looking at nuclear waste sites, but trying to do so from a future archaeologist's kind of perspective, right? So she looks back using this sort of myriad sources like scientific literature from the 18th century to 20th century writing on nuclear experiments, and she's trying to use these as evidence, as if we don't know, what the purpose of these sites were. So she's like analyzing them both architecturally and culturally, but from a very distant, sort of almost disinterested perspective. So it's not about the morals of atomic testing or anything like that. It's really about a sort of going to the site after the fact and trying to look at that. And we have, for instance, another piece which I think could be relevant to such thinking, which is Kay Joan Alder's piece, who is really a piece about writing. So in a way, it's like Enrique's, right? It's a text about other texts, but she looks at naturalist writing, and part of what she's looking at is Aldo Leopold and his sort of well-known text, Thinking Like a Mountain, which is exactly that, right? So how do we shift our perspectives by really slowing down everything, to Anthony's glacial pace, these kind of thinking and what it allows, what
it's my
opportunities it opens up. Yeah, we're all very quick. It's you that is very slow.
But I would say though that we also, the geological is extremely useful for us, but the time can also happen quite quickly, right? Like the way in which, right, a volcano erupts is a kind of eruption of geological time, or of a kind of pent up, right, set of forces. So or shifts that happen. So there's also things that happen quite quickly, like say with Felipe Correa's resource extraction urbanism in South America, that's looking at the history of these company towns around different forms of resource extraction. Or I think that along with Kate, Enrique, of course, Ana Maria and Mariana's pieces, there's such a wide array of takes on the geological, and the kind of different terms in which we place them in and the classifications for it. So it really makes it, again, it makes it, for us, the journal is also a great way to learn. So we learn so much about other parts of the world because we see these almost as like dispatches from people. So it's extremely edifying for us at that level.
Yeah, maybe from the outside, what I think is interesting as well is that while reading your pieces, Mariana and Ana Maria, to me, there were things that were collapsing, like on a kind of sort of plane, and making them collapse. It shows also the difference in the length of their development, but it's necessary to somehow collapse to see that difference. And I was thinking about that, no, like what you're saying, Anthony, like there are definitely different velocities. But then when you recognize them as a still that collapses them all, there is a sort of even kind of atemporal condition that is also to me very interesting, that it's not trying to draw chronologies, quite the opposite. It's trying to kind of generating coexistence that by coexisting then cast light on the argument. So I think that is very powerful in these two examples. And maybe to include one more question, and I mean, we are here so we can discuss a little bit more, and if we are tired, we close up. But Marina is asking about what is included and what is not included. She particularly says, what of the Americas as a territory goes inside the map and what stays outside? She considers that the idea of map and territory is not a one kind of vector direction, but can be more fuzzy. And so following that thread, what are the differences that you could not avoid to kind of point out to define the territory of the Americas. So what is that cannot be left out to understand the American territory?
And I want to take that up for a second, just because it's a great question, and it reminds me. Recently I read Jules Verne's second novel, which is The Adventures of Captain Hatteras, which is a polar exploration novel, and it was written in 1864. Shortly after there were a host of failed polar expeditions, right? So the novel moves up latitudes, right? Almost like ladder rungs, right? And then the narrative, as soon as it gets to around the 70th parallel, there are no more sources that Jules Verne can consult in order to know what's above the 70th parallel. So basically, the characters start making up names of land masses, right? And it's really interesting because the crew is British and American, and because he's a French writer, the new landmass that's found up near the North Pole is called New America, which is basically kind of like what was lost during the Louisiana Purchase, right? Which is this weird, this kind of like weird kind of comeuppance. So, and this last part of the question is like, what are things that you cannot avoid to define the territory of the Americas? And I think, again, I'm gonna rely on Mariana's and Ana Maria's pieces. I like saying those names together. They go so well. But I think one of the things that those two pieces are so wonderful, and one of the things that I found in them that I think kind of addresses this question is the kind of the illusion of the stability of the point of view. Right. So time, when we deal with historical materials, when we write about history, it's like we're always raging against the idea that there's the point of view that is singular and stable. So that's something that I think is encoded in a map, or can be encoded in a map, which means that you can use mapping, or you can kind of use the kind of like the very, very strange relationship or the false dichotomy between the map and the territory as a way to contest the stability of the point of view, in what we do as writers and historians and critics and designers. So.
And to follow up on, oh, sorry, go ahead, Mariana.
Sorry, just to add on that, there is a map published in the Descripción Geológica de la Patagonia, done by Ferullo, where you see South America and you see every detail of the map quoted to a geographer. So you see a line and you see next to it the name of the person that did that part of the map. And so the map, the whole thing is just a series of points and a series of names. And I think that is quite interesting, because it makes you understand that building a map is putting people together, people that have very different points of view, and it's an editorial work. Building a map is just adding every time one little piece to that drawing. So yes, that was
that is very nice.
Well, and yes, that's very nice, because I think putting people together is precisely part of what we wanted to do in terms of expanding from the notion of the kind of Benedict Anderson Imagined Communities map as a logo. We wanted to move away from that. So we were very interested in being very expansive about what constitutes the Americas. So it may have to do with migration. It may have to do with kind of material matter, like we deal with so much in this issue of bigger than big. But we were once asked, well, the United States is in Iraq. How does that fit in your journal? And we said, well, yes, that we see that as part of an engagement of the Americas, or the fact that why the Philippines didn't become a state in the context of the United States, that history and its fraught relationship with colonialism and imperialism. So we're interested in almost a kind of Americas as much a state of mind as a set of places and territories. So it's a really great question about the territory and the map.
Yeah, maybe to wrap up a little bit, I can help to mention kind of my experience with these Americas in plural, which I really like a lot. I mean, I'm not from any country in the Americas, but I happened to go to the US for a couple of years and then to live in Argentina for 10 years. And I do have this feeling that the continent has a thing as a whole. Like it's not segregated, and it's difficult to conceptualize what that is. And I think the journals kind of search for this kind of way to describe it in as many ways as possible. It's probably the only way to approach it, because if you had to find an essence, it would be impossible. It would be reductive, it would be cliche, it would be just kind of a very narrow vision. And I think it's really nice what you have in your hands. And I really want to thank you, because this event also, I don't know, I really enjoyed all this conversation. We could go on, I'm sure, all of us. For Dan, it's like 5 in the morning, but we could just continue until the sun rises in Tel Aviv. But really, I want to thank you in not only on my regard, but also in the name of the school. Ciro was also telling me to thank you guys for this. He's been watching, a lot of people is watching in YouTube, which is the most common channel that we usually share. But I want to thank you for the people that's been here and asking questions, and yeah, but mostly to all of you for preparing. This was really, really very nice, and yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yes,
thank you for having us. Yeah.
Muchas gracias.
Okay, well, it's been, I think, a wonderful conversation, and we are really glad to have had the event of Manifest. And okay, yeah. Thanks to everybody, and I'm sure we'll keep on discussing this interest in the following events of the series with Anna, and yes, okay. Thanks, everybody.
We're in touch. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Bye.